Welcome to the course TDDD23, Design and Programming of Computer Games. This is a COVID version, a distance version, but that's going to work fine because having experience from the spring, it actually works really great. So let's just get going. In the course, we're going to do everything from the course webpage, and all links and everything will be there. And also you will see links to the greatest videos of the past years using this link for the Leo Game Awards, like all the final contestants. So that's the top 10% maybe of the games being developed during the year. If you go to YouTube, you can also search for TDD23 and you will find a lot of game videos that people have been presented. And this will give you a great scope of the size of the games that you can develop. All the Leo Game Awards tend to be a little bit bigger and better games. So they are a bit above and beyond what's required in the course. But when you go to YouTube, you will get a more varied variation and you can kind of figure out the scope. And during the 10 years that I've been giving the course, actually the size of the games being developed is not bigger. And this is related to the fact that the tools that we use today are much more complex. So it generally takes more time to learn how to use Unity than it used to do to learn a simpler platform. But the games you're able to produce in the same time might not be bigger. Later in life, when you've been developing a bit longer, you will be able to be much more productive using these more advanced tools. But since they are so complex, you might not get the end result now. So this is where you can see what kind of game you are expected to deliver in the course project. I tend to advocate freedom in my project courses, the freedom to make choices about what project to do, so what game you will be doing, what game project, what game technology to use, and what kind of programming language to use, what graphics to use, and what level of graphics that you focus on in the project. All of this freedom comes at a price where you also have to live with that choice. And sometimes it can be hard to make the choice. You just have to make it and work on. One of the key aspects of this freedom is also to focus your learning experience in terms of having chosen a game tool to actually learn just the subset that's relevant to your project, because there is an endless supply of knowledge to be watched on YouTube or other sources, and it will eventually take too much time. So you have to be a bit focused also in your learning and think that you can learn more things in the past. Another hard thing with this kind of freedom is yourself. You have to focus on understanding what you can do with the engine and not end up having a lot of things in your project that you built yourself that's already in the engine because you didn't find it. So you should many times think that there is a lot of things in it. And it takes a while to get into an engine so that you are quick and easy to understand and find where things are. The reason I give you a lot of freedom in the course is that is this 90% learning thing that comes from doing things on your own, doing the real thing, trying to make a real game. So this is like the back to that. If I tell you a lot of things, you go to my lectures, you see only 10 to 20% of that learning will stick. And so you have to get down to this lower level here of work to learn things really well. Also, the course is focused on you building a game prototype. And the reason for this is that the game industry doesn't really care about your grades or your experience. They want to see real work that you have done and that you are demonstrating the right kind of development focus there, where you're doing things that are very well developed, finished, polished, and finished, very important. And it doesn't have to be big. It's more important actually to be able to do something that is small but finished. And this I know is something that game industry is picking up people from portfolio work demonstrating good skills. We have had several students in the past who actually work at the big game companies in Sweden and also abroad, and this many times come from that. If you are very interested in gaming industry, I think also I would recommend you to work alone in the project, because then they will know that you were sole responsible for the portfolio, and not that you had a brilliant partner in the project did all the work and you just tagged along. And that makes it easier for them to take you on board. So the course is organized the following way. You try to make a really good small game, a focused small game that you build, test, and redesign. And getting to playtesting with other players is super important, because this is where the magic actually starts, and all the development before that is actually just build up to be able to do testing with players. And it's so easy to see games that have been perfected versus games that have just been developed, and you can feel it instantly in a game project. And for me, it's extremely easy to judge, because I have 10 years of experience and I've seen thousands, actually literally have seen thousands of game projects throughout the years. Small but perfect is then the focus for that. When it comes to getting help in the course, we will this year be using GitLab issue tracking as the first line of defense, so to speak. So you go to the course webpage and follow a link to a GitLab issue tracking system, and there you put up your questions. And there's also a possibility for you to add files and stuff like that. And you can also make your issues confidential, meaning that only members of this project team, which will be me and Hanna Müller, who will be supporting me in the course this year. So you don't email questions to anyone, you put them on issue tracking. If we cannot solve the problems there, we go to a Teams meeting, but we always do that as a second choice, because setting up meetings is really nice, but it also is extremely time consuming for both you and us. And I find many times many questions can be answered quite quickly if you just ask them. So that's how we do it this year. Then you will be doing a number of screencast presentations. The midterm screencast presentation in the middle of the course, where you show the game status, show what the game works like, show some code on that, and express what's been built. Don't talk so much about what you're going to do, because that's not really relevant. And we cannot give you feedback on ideas that you want to bring back, unless you have a particular question that you want to get answered to. Then at the end, you will do one joint game teaser screencast, and this could be used for the Leo Game Awards competition. And then every person in the team must do an individual development screencast, where you present how the game was built, how you work with it, the design issues that you've been addressing, how you addressed progression and variation, and so forth. More on all of this in later videos. So here in the individual screencast, you actually should show how well you have reached the knowledge goals of the course in terms of what the course criteria are, and you should demonstrate that. This means also that you cannot divide that in the group. You cannot say another person was responsible for this part of learning, which it in fact means developing a particular thing. So I don't know anything about that. So those are the things. And all of these screencasts you can put on YouTube, or you can put them on OneDrive, your student OneDrive, and share them. These are my preferred options, because it's much easier for me to view them from either YouTube or OneDrive. And the OneDrive you can share only with me. YouTube you can share with me, but it has to be open on invitation. I don't want to have any special links and passwords. If you want security, you put it on your own OneDrive student account and share it with me and Hanna, and those usernames will be on the course webpage. So you go to the course webpage at all times for that. In the course, we work with teams of 1 and 2. In special cases, it can also be okay to be 3, not more than that. Many times, because I don't see any bigger development happening when you're larger teams throughout the time. And when, say, if you would be 6 person, I would need at least a triple size game, and it's not going to happen because the learning time is so big. So 1 or 2 are preferred. And once again, if you want to get a kind of position in the gaming area, doing the work alone is smart, because it means when you show your portfolio work, the recipient knows you are the one developing this, and the person they're asking to have a position at that company is responsible for what's been done. Otherwise, that kind of destroys the value of the prototype. But if you're not focused on that, working together, many times personal choice if you like it or not. Many times I feel that 2 people working together make really great work. So that scenario said, it's your choice to be working on your own or in a group. So you will be handing in a game plan, describing your project, what to do, what technology you use, how you're going to focus on progression and variation, how you're going to teach the game. Those things you hand up in kind of a plan. Then at the end, you hand in your final game for playing, and these are all handed in on the course webpage submission form. And there's a number of screencasts. So those are the things that you're going to be doing and handing in, and that's it. And remember, at the end, screencasts for midterm, the game plan, those are all for feedback. So these are the quality that you put into them, the better feedback you can get. We don't look at any qualitative measures for that, for grading. So if you don't hand in a game plan that's very detailed, then you will get poor feedback. That is what will happen. The grading in the course comes from the end result, the final game and the final screencasts, and how you demonstrate your knowledge from those. All other things are just for feedback. So we don't really grade or look for quality determination of those. Those are more for our discussion. So what is a good project? How do you get a good grade? So you will have to go to the course webpage also to look for that, and we can always have a discussion on these issues in general. But in some terms, we could say the quality of the completed project as demonstrated by the project and your screencast demonstrations. So the technical aspects, of course, of the game, how advanced is it and how well has it been implemented. Here we're looking at how well are you actually using the engines and the tools that are inside the engines to produce your game and getting the game to work. And there is a lot of tool support for you, so you shouldn't be building things your own, you should be using what's in the engines. How finished and polished is your end project? How much have you been able to do play testing and perfecting your game? How smooth is it, the movement of the character, the way that the challenge grows? We look at consistency and look and feel of the game, so that it's one theme, unity, a unity of the game experience, but this is a bit of a lower criteria. But if you're having a pirate spaceship game experience, it should be piratey all the way, and you need to use that. When it comes to variation, to the design aspects, we look for variation. So how much does the game actually able to change its experience? This can be graphically or game mechanically, the focus that it puts on different things. And you will have to look at other game screencasts to see more on that. Progression, how well does the game go from pick up and play, easy to get into, to start playing, into something that requires more skill, a bit more challenging. And then finally, how well does the game give teaching, visuals, and feedback as part of the game experience? So not instructions telling the player how to play the game, but the way that the game presents all the data that's actually in the rule set in a way that the player understands this from that experience and will get better playing the game from that. And there is a very interesting line. Tutorials is not what we want to go for. We want a pure game experience that grows so that in a way the player picks up the way to play the game when playing the game. One thing that I don't do is have specific project grade discussions. Before we set the grades on the projects, you cannot come to me with your project and ask about if you should do more, if this is enough for a certain grade, and so forth. You do your best and you hand in your work, and then you will be graded. After the grading, we can have a discussion if you want to about what to do with the project and how to maybe continue if you are not satisfied with the end result. But you cannot come to us and have that kind of discussion to ensure that your project is sufficient. You compare this to a written exam where you cannot beforehand discuss the questions on the exam, how to get a good grade from that exam. Instead, you have to go and do the exam, and once the exam has been done, a discussion can be made about how to make it better. What we can, of course, also always do is discuss the grading criteria and what those mean, but never in relation to judging or pre-grading your project. The design focus in the game. So the design is not about which kind of game you're doing or the graphics of the game. The design is like the experience development. And I look for a certain amount of things. So perfection, how well tested and polished this is. Many times it means you have to have other people playtesting, observing what they're doing and kind of redesigning it, because you will many times discover the game is too fast, it's like directed in the wrong way, people are assuming the wrong things from your standpoint. I'm not being able to show this, and many times it's because you have a lack of visual representation of things happening in the game, that the player cannot understand the game because it's actually not good enough in terms of polish and perfection. Another design criteria I look at for is core gameplay focus, that the game has a one thing action that you're doing, and that it's a racing game, which is not also a strategic war game at the same time, because those will be conflicting game development. Having said that, of course it's possible to mix game mechanics, but it's also very risky and it's very easy to end up in situations where the mix actually is counterproductive. And so for this course, focusing on one action and really developing that is central to the design rather than making a big experience. Many times it's because the more you focus, the more you actually can develop that focused ability. And to get into a scenario where for instance, your jumping is really super fun to play without enemies. That's more of a design challenge than adding enemies to make a bit more trivial jumping game fun. Having said that, of course, I understand that platforming games require enemies at most times, so that was just an example. Progression we'll look at. Being able to go from pick up and play to something requiring skill. So this actually means pushing the boundaries of your game in time and enabling the player to grow into the game, giving the player access to things later on and developing that. Also making a low entry point to the game so you can start playing until you develop the full aspect of the game. Variation, that is the experience. That the experience is different in different sections or levels of the game to keep the game being interesting. Having variation continuously is important for players. And then finally, the in-game tutoring. What feedback and visuals are you creating in your game user interface that supports the player understanding how to play the game, the rules of the game, the underlying values of the game? Now, this is not the instructions or tutoring parts that you might want to do in the project. Instead, it's all the graphics and the animations and visual effects that you do to draw focus on certain things in order to explain what to do in the game. And so we'll see more on this in later lectures. The game development environment you choose, well, the world is open for you. You can choose any specific game-specific engine that you want in any programming languages, but it has to be a real game development environment dedicated to game development. It cannot be a 3D media library that you then add yourself a lot of functionality for. So it has to be a dedicated engine. It doesn't have to be a system like Unreal, Unity, or Godot that is a visual development environment with a lot of visual work. You can have a pure programming level game engine. Pygame, which is an old Python get into Python gaming API, was the platform for a few of the winning games in the Leo Game Awards competition. So you don't require that big engine. Having said that, currently Unity, Unreal, and Godot are the kind of the more relevant names in the game area. Godot is an open source engine that has been growing steadily and has a very large development base and a lot of funding. And that is an open source Unity Lite, and the model in Unity and Godot is very similar. I find many times that Godot is great for the size of projects that we would be doing in this course. Unity is going towards bigger system development, more massive systems. Unity is also a very relevant engine in terms of industry experience, in particular outside of the gaming area. Unity is very well known, and a lot of standard game development is happening in both Unreal and Unity. So it's might actually be very smart to learn those in terms of general software development. I know for a fact that Unreal Engine is actually earning more money from outside of the gaming industry today than from inside, because they're doing a lot of sales to architecture and construction visualization, for instance. So, but you can also choose a game engine for a programming language you want to get more experience with, and that doesn't matter. And I don't see at the end that game projects actually win because they have a more advanced engine. Sometimes it's actually the other way around. It doesn't really matter. And for a long time, we had a lot of the top-notch games in the league game competition actually not coming from the big names. And it might be because Unreal Engine and Unity takes a lot of time to learn. Godot is also massive in that sense. And you might not be as productive in the course. Next year, maybe if you've been working with these engines, you might be. So that might be a reason. But from the course perspective, you can choose any engine that's actually game-oriented directly. You can even put together a 3D scene engine with a physics engine if you want to achieve the same end result. But I wouldn't recommend it because it tends to take a lot of time and actually most of the time end up creating problems for you rather than facilitating you. One of the biggest success factors for the course is to limit your scope and make a perfect implementation. Making a perfect implementation will require that you finish your game, first version of your game quite early so you can do playtesting, so you can observe others and find out what makes your game work. You can, if you're doing more challenging game mechanical design, you might not be able to finish that quickly, but even then you actually have to see others playtest these things. So the more you can limit your scope and make a simpler version of the same game mechanic that you've done, the easier it's going to be to make a really great experience. But this doesn't mean that you should make a standard game or clone or reactive game just because they are a bit faster in the beginning. This is true for any project, and you have to get your basics up and running so you can play test. That mainly means you have to try to implement a first more limited version of your eventual final game experience, so that you can get into playtesting and get some end results. And look at this scope image here. You can see that the mark is a little bit off, and that is that even if you're scoping, you might actually not be focusing precisely correctly on the mark. So, like I said, playtesting with others, watching others play your games, this is a core activity for developing really great games. And the thing is that when you playtest yourself, you're going to make the game maybe too hard, maybe too difficult. People can't understand it. So you're going to end up getting stuck there, because you cannot separate many times between what you understand and know and what others are able to pick up from your user interface, and you will create experiences that are maybe too complex or fragmented, where the controls are too hard. So in some cases, if you're doing a super ultra hard platforming game, you might actually be a good play tester, but in the general case, you're actually the worst play tester because you have too much understanding of the game. Also find that many times it can be hard to get new ideas in your area before you actually let others playtest and you watch and observe their behavior. One of the things that is tricky when doing playtesting is to watch what people do, listen to what they say, but not listen to what they say they want, because many times they will tell you things that the game is good, but it's not actually. You can see it, or they will say it's bad, but it's not true, it's actually good, and you can see it. And also they might tell you you should develop a different game, a game that they're building. And this is not very uncommon. Sometimes people are creative for you by actually trying to change what you're doing. And this is very, very bad for you. The focus goes away and you get confused. So observing others and to some degree not listening to them is what you want to do. Testing with peers, I think, is actually very great. Many peers can see flaws, but can also be constructive in how to solve these flaws in your project. But once again, here you have to avoid comments that are actually about changing what you're trying to do. Just because for them a better experience would actually be a different game doesn't mean your game is not working. And this, of course, this also goes into the mid-screencast, where the more effort you put in before the mid-course screencast, the better we can give you feedback, because we can only give you feedback from what's there. So this is important. An important success factor for your project is also to pick an engine that suits you and your project. So your previous experiences, knowledge about different programming languages, whether or not you want to work visually in a system like Unity, Unreal, or Godot, or if you want to work with a pure programming experience in a particular programming language. And this also depends a little bit on how much you can use visual placement, graphical placement in a 3D environment. Then you need to spend a lot of time learning how to do your particular things, the things that you need in your project from the tech you're using. You have to kind of get some basic understanding, but then I think it's important actually to quickly get into the particulars of your project. And this is basically because systems like Unity, Unreal, and Godot, they have massive amounts of user interface, YouTube videos that you can watch, and the time it takes to watch all of these will compete for the time you have to spend on your project focusing on your particular things. But of course, you have to understand the basic core concepts in there in order to be able to do it in a good way. One of the course goals is to learn how to use a game engine that's out there as a technology basis. So this is like a programming language or development environment. So this means you cannot build your own engine or use your own engine that you have built in some other graphics course, because this is in direct conflict with the learning goals of the course. It also takes too much time to build your own engine, and the level that you can get to during the course or even previously before the course is not sufficient. So building your own engine you have to do in different courses. Building level editors. It's a bit harder to say than compared to building your own engine. Generally, I would recommend not to do that because, again, you're focusing on the wrong things. You're not building the game experience. You're trying to produce kind of the tools for that. In game development, tool development for a particular project is one of the major time consumers. So this is what big production companies do. They build particular tools in order to create the worlds in which the games work. But that is for really big productions. So it is, of course, relevant. What is interesting is, like in engines like Unity, Godot, Unreal, you can create tool scripts that automate or make it easier for you to perfect your game. Figuring out how to speed up that development by adding script tools in order to manipulate and be efficient. That is definitely worthwhile in the course. But for level editors, being able to do game development stuff doesn't really, you will lose time. If you're working outside of an engine like Unity, there are tools like Tiled and others that can use for level editing. So I don't see it as a need for you to develop your own level editors in that sense. Audio. So graphics and sound in the course, of course, is really super important for games, but in the course, those are not grading criteria. If you're doing really great work with graphics and making all the production yourself and spending a lot of time there, then that is definitely a bonus, and I will take that into account as a plus when grading. Of course, you cannot remove the other parts, like not learning how to build using the development engines and stuff like that. But so if you're doing art creation, then that is super great, and you should show me how. But it's also definitely okay to just use placeholder graphics and put that into the game. I just want you to use a unified kind of graphics so you get a theme in the course. So if you're using medieval themes, don't put spacecrafts into the game unless it's a space medieval thing, and that's where you have to have your own art, maybe. So Unity is important for the course, but the rest you can use any kind of resource. Also find sometimes that if you have too good art in the beginning of a game project, this might actually cloud the testing of the great game experience. And in theory, I mean, in the theory that game developers put out there in terms of what leads to success, core mechanics is the only thing that actually impacts how well a game will work. So testing that with poor graphics is easier than with great graphics. If you have really great graphics, people tend to get blown away by the graphics in this first initial experience, and they will say, wow, this is great, super great, it looks so great. But then when they play it after a while, they feel, what is this? This is just a poor copy of something that I've already played. I don't want to play this. So too good graphics so early in a project might actually be counterproductive. But having said that, of course, it's your choice. I just want you to know that the quality of the art and graphics is not an issue for the course. This is not something that we work on in those terms. And you can download and use online resources as long as they are free for you to use. You don't have to make any graphics yourself. And all I want you to do is consider the unity of the project using a joint set of graphics that works well together. At the end, I want to remind you here of the importance of perfection. And then Braid, which is a successful indie game, and this, the developer of Braid said that it took, I see it's misspelled. It took 1 year of development and 1 year of perfection to get Braid to the level it required to be successful. And this I see consistently actually reports about having to spend at least half the time of the project on perfecting the game to actually reach a very good end result. So I want you to remember this. Limiting your scope and getting something working quite early is important to be able to play test and reiterate and redesign and make perfect, so the experience is kind of feels genuine. And this is where you're gonna have to do this severe limitation on your game ideas in order to get to that end, so that you have time to do playtesting. Not playtesting your game is ultimately many times going to lead to a very poor game development. You have to be super experienced before you can actually not do playtesting and still make really great games. So remember the course web page. This is where all the magic is happening. You go to this link, you look at recorded lectures, you look at how to hand in your projects, how to hand in your game and stuff like that. You go via links to the online help to get issue tracking going, so that you can get answers to questions that you have in this COVID version of the course TDD23 for 2020, which is a full distance course. And having said that, I wish you good luck.